evening and listening to what is happening in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is something I feel really excited about. I feel like the Lord is in what is emerging in Cambridge, and I'm hopeful that what is emerging in Cambridge is something that people will care about outside of Cambridge and in lots of other parts of the globe. So this is the vision for the Helen Keller Spiritual Life Center, and what I want to share with all of you is not just about the center specifically, but kind of where this vision came from, a little bit about Cambridge, and why it's good ground for this new thing. This was just there for cuteness, I guess. But I came to Cambridge in 2015 as a picture. It would be a video, and he's babbling because he liked to pretend to read. But that's Theo making the long trek from Anchorage to Boston in 2015. So that's when I got to Cambridge. And when I arrived there, I'm sure how many of you have been to Swedenborg Chapel? Good. So a lot of you have been there. When I got there in 2015, there were about 15 very active members, also very tired active members, which I'm sure you're all familiar with that state. Not a lot of hope for the future, sort of a sense of resignation, and a lot of deferred upkeep, not only in the building, but in the finances and kind of organizational structure of the place. And while that was true, and there was sort of this defeatist kind of attitude, as an outsider, all I could see was the potential of this amazing space. The Swedenborg Chapel is literally in the heart of Cambridge. There it is, this little pink dot, right in the heart of Harvard Square. And to me, knowing that, it feels like we have an obligation to be an outreach center for the Swedenborgian Church beyond just the support of our congregational life. We're right across from Harvard Yard. We get a lot of foot traffic. Okay, so this was a little video. Let's see if it works. Just to give you a sense, although I know a lot of you have been there, this just gives you a sense of where we are. It's William James Hall across the street. So here's Harvard, busy corner in Harvard. This is Harvard Yard right here. So this is Memorial Hall, which is a very famous building. That's where Helen Keller graduated from Radcliffe. Oh. And then you come across the street. This is the School of Architecture for the Harvard University. And then there we are, right there in the corner.
Didn't the Swedenborg start the School of Art?
Yeah, yes, and I'm going to get to that.
Oh, yes.
So we're right in Harvard. Not only that, but in the late 80s, we got a seat on the Harvard Chapman. So there I am in the blue with a lot more hair. It's a wonderful opportunity. It's a grandfathered in spot. So we most of the chaplains have to maintain kind of an active student group. But for some of the smaller denominations, the Christian Scientists, the Swedenborgians, they just really appreciate religious diversity. So they are happy to keep us on. And we've always had kind of a trickling of students at Harvard who have been associated with the denomination, with the Swedenborgian movement as a whole. So some of you maybe saw my video. They did a bunch of videos with the chaplains explaining different things about their traditions. And this was one of mine, the 6,184 views. So again, it's just a really great platform for us to be associated with really the preeminent university in the world. We're also just a couple blocks away from Harvard Divinity School, so lots of seminarians milling about in the area. There's also a smaller center for the study of world religions. Rebecca Esterson, if you know her, she worked there for a bit while she was studying. But again, with our focus on interfaith work, this could be a great partner for us. And then speaking of the Swedenborgian history on this quarter, so right across the street from us is William James Hall, which of course is not a historic building, but many of you probably know that William James' father, Henry James Sr., was a devout Swedenborgian. He carried around his big case of Swedenborg's works wherever he went, and William James was certainly influenced by Swedenborgian thought. So they're our neighbor right across the street. We did a lecture 2 years ago about William James, and there was a course being taught about him, and so the students came and listened to the lecture. A lot of opportunity for communication and learning. And then the Harvard Graduate School of Design, which is right next door. The chapel is literally right outside of the frame on the right, is the original school for architecture at Harvard, which one of the founding fathers of the school, the first director of the School of Architecture, was Herbert Langford Warren, who was a member of the Cambridge Society. He was also the designer of the chapel itself. And he was very heavily involved in the arts and crafts movement of the time. So he's a very well-known figure. There's still, I think, if you're the highest donor at Harvard, if you donate the highest amount to the graduate school of design, it's called the Warren. You become a Warren something, I don't know. But he's still honored today. So there's a lot of love. The design students who are studying architecture right next door have a lot of love for our space, and we are deep within the history of that corner, and right now we're asking the question of whether we can be embedded in its future. So this is another shot of the chapel. It's just a beautiful building, built in 1901, and then right off to the side, and I'll show you this in more detail a little later, is the annex that was built when the theological school moved away. The chapel was originally built for the society in Cambridge and then also for the New Church Theological School. This is a historical picture of when the theological school was next door. So this is where I think George McCurdy went there. Yes, yes, there you go.
He lived in that building.
He lived in that building, all right. So, so the chapel has a rich history with study. A lot of, I bet there's other ministers who preached there when they were in school. Gard, did you preach there as a student?
I believe so.
When you were at SSR?
It was our chapel.
Very good.
Trevor, did your
My sister got married there.
Very good.
Oh,
Yeah.
your father went to school there,
My father went to school there.
and your uncle George.
Yeah.
As a kid, we had the coffee hour in the Sparks Mansion.
That's-
That was cool.
And I bet that was cool, and that's exactly why the annex was built, was because when the Sparks
I
man,
was there when Warner Rice was the pastor.
Wilfred Rice, oh, very good.
Oh,
Wilfred, he also served the Freiburg New Church, which is interesting, yeah.
Absolutely.
Very good. Well, anyway, so a lot of us know this deep history. So the Sparks House was actually moved across the street. It's now the home for the minister of Memorial Church, and it's still across the street from the chapel. And now this is where the design school lives. So we're kind of we're actually the last property on the corner that doesn't belong to Harvard. Anyway, just some shots of the chapel. This is the altar. Picture the windows over the altar, the pews, they're all very, I'm not an architect, but the handmade, very representative of the arts and crafts movement. Inside.
Wow.
And then there's a great shot from the front. And then sort of in contrast, the annex, it was built in 1965, has always, I guess it's leaked since it was first built, sadly. It's never been in that great shape. It's pretty small, it's not handicap accessible. This is just a lot of limitations to this auxiliary building. And then there's a lot of limitations to kind of what's inside the building. Many of you probably know that the Newbury Street Swedenborg book room was sold when the chapel was, this is a whole important part of our history, but it was sold, and that was the primary mission of the Mass Union, was to maintain a book room. So those books were moved to Cambridge, but to my understanding, they've never really been cared for well, and it's never really been an active reading room or really very effective for outreach. Right now, they're just kind of sitting on a shelf. We've been very blessed, though. All of our records that were in our basement, we've signed an agreement with Harvard Divinity School, who will be taking all of our archived records and cataloging them for us. So we'll have a Swedenborgian collection at Harvard, which is a very wonderful opportunity for future scholars and people who are studying Swedenborg. And it's one of the ways, as we imagine moving forward and potentially having an outreach effort that isn't just a lot of bookshelves with books from the 1900s, that these books can still be accessible in the area, so scholars could still come and study at the chapel, and they would just have to walk 2 blocks down the street to access any materials they want, which is really wonderful. But it is beautiful, even with our limitations. We do a lot of weddings at the chapel. We've been hosting a lot of theater lately. It's a great backdrop for Shakespeare. This is Richard III. We've also started doing a Taizé service monthly, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of sung prayer service. It's very conducive to candlelight, and we have candles in the chapel, which is really beautiful. So that's been a great outreach, and it's really been attractive to a lot of students, a lot of seminarians have been coming to that. So we've been doing our best with what we have, but we've been really asking this question of how can we do better? And specifically, what does a reading room in the 21st century look like? The mission of the Massachusetts New Church Union, the first mission is to maintain a religious library and reading room and to promote the knowledge of the doctrines of the New Jerusalem as revealed in the Word and taught in the theological writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. How do we do that today effectively? How can we fulfill this mission? So while all of this was brewing and a lot of work was being done, this was not an instantaneous success. We actually did a year of work with the help of Reverend Anna Woofenden, helping the congregation to think about the past, think about the future. You know, as all of you probably know, change is hard, especially within churches, maybe even especially in small churches. But the idea of change was starting to become more realistic when I glanced at this shelf right here in our library, in our parlor, and that was just last October when the idea of dedicating a new space, a new reading room for the 21st century, a new place to share the vision and the message of our church in the name of Helen Keller. I admit the fact that she's a woman was certainly very attractive at this time of day, at this time in the world, and then certainly from what I've studied about her, it just made more and more sense because of her deep roots in Cambridge and her deep roots in the church. This is from an address that she gave to a national meeting of Swedenborgians in 1928. It seems to me the new church has a great mission in the world. The people are in need of just the message that Swedenborg gave for mankind. Instead of merely listening to that message, we should go out and teach it. I want to see the new church put on its beautiful garments and shake itself from the dust of aloofness. Seemed like she was preaching to us as the vision came together. So for those of you who may not know, this is a little timeline of Helen's time in Cambridge. The little purple circle is where this chapel is. Where the little green dot, that's where she lived. She didn't live on campus. She lived in an apartment on Dana Street. And then Radcliffe, and then also the Cambridge School for Young Ladies where she attended, were kind of on the other side of Harvard Yard. So maybe she didn't walk just past the chapel. Maybe they took a different route. But clearly the chapel was a part of her time there. And the chapel was completed in 1901, and she graduated from Radcliffe in 1904. So there was construction happening at the chapel at the same time that she was learning and developing as a young person. She has a lot of ties still in Cambridge. This is a picture of a fountain that was built in honor of Annie Sullivan in 1960. So there's Helen getting her hands wet in the fountain, and that's still right there in Harvard Square. She was also the first woman to receive an honorary degree from Harvard. And she still has, at the Radcliffe Institute, they still have many of her papers and letters, and she's one of the people that they honor in their kind of hall of famous women and famous women graduates. Also, the Perkins School for the Blind is right in Watertown, just 4 miles from the chapel. And the Horace School for the Deaf, which is where she did study and learn to speak, is just 2 miles away in Allston, Massachusetts. And I visited Perkins, and they are they very much claim Helen as one of their own, and they have a wonderful collection there. They pulled out all their old raised type and braille copies of the Arcana that they had there. They'll be a great partner with us. So what will this center do and be? So this is a architectural rendering of the vision of the center itself, which we imagine being on the main floor of a new auxiliary building. We really cannot do this in our current space. We have to have, first of all, something that's handicapped accessible, and then something that can really house a larger offering for the community. So the idea is that the first level of the auxiliary building would be devoted to Helen Keller. Here you see what might be exhibition displays. Hopefully they would be handicap accessible for different, in different ways, multi-sensory. There may be ways to have changeable exhibits. If you came to my workshop on Sunday, you know Helen Keller had a very deep and vast and amazing life, so probably we'll have to have different displays at different times. So there'd be a way for you to come in and a visitor could really either get a very, the Cliff Note version of Helen Keller's life and really the story of her spiritual awakening. Not the story of her at the water pump, which is the story most people know, but the story of her spiritual life and then the way her spiritual life influenced all of the other amazing things that she was a part of throughout her life. So you can get the Cliff Note version, maybe we have technology so people can go deeper if they want to learn more. And then there's opportunities to engage in different ways. Classes, small groups. We've been talking a lot with CSS about offering an annual Helen Keller conference, so there'd be opportunities for scholars to engage with her. But then there'd also be a place for community. So you have some little tables and chairs. Maybe over here you'd have books for sale from the Swedenborg Foundation. We've talked about having a tea garden so that this is a space that really is engaging all of the senses. We know that Helen's sense of smell was important, and taste and touch. We want to find ways for children to be able to access the space and learn and feel comfortable there, feel safe and at home. So those are some of the things. This is a side view of the current design image, so it's hard to see the chapel in the back, but it's just kind of a side cut. So this top space is the Helen Keller Center. Down here we have multi-purpose space, which we currently we rent out to 3 other congregations. We have a lot of AA groups and Al-Anon groups. There's a lot of potential. We like the fact that we don't exactly know what will fill every single space, but space is a huge premium in Cambridge, so we have no doubt that it will get filled. Go ahead.
Is this where, I see the chapel in the background.
Yeah.
And so this is where the leaky place?
Yes.
And you're gonna take the leaky place and rebuild it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So this would be the new auxiliary building, and then this design has a lovely big open picture window. One of the pieces is we really want this space to be very visible to the outside, not a hidden secret space. The way Mark talks about it, who's the architect who did this, the chapel is kind of that chapel of that architecture is sort of inviting you in, but it's secret. It's stone, it's dark, but that's part of the spirituality of it. Is you come into this secret place and then you find God. And one of the images of this new space is to kind of bring a more modern reflection to that by having something very open, very welcoming, very accessible. There'll be an accessible ramp from this side. There'll be an elevator straight from the parking lot. So we really want this to give the energy of openness and welcome of all people. And then the upper level is where office space will be. We'll have a smaller boardroom and library. We currently are the home of the central office for the Swedenborgian Church, so they would have office space in the upper floor as well. So these are some of the different things we want to do in the center. First and foremost, as I've already mentioned, we want to share the story of Helen's spiritual awakening through multi-sensory displays. This is her writing one of her great quotes: "Faith is the strength by which a shattered world shall emerge into the light." We will still be a bit of a traditional book room in terms of maintaining a reference collection of Swedenborgian texts, but we'll definitely want to find ways to be able to do that through electronics, through other ways of interacting, in a lot of ways because of the premium of space. But this would be a place where you could come and you could say, "Hey, I want to know about Swedenborg," and we could give them that answer and give them those resources. We would like to sell books. That's still something people do still like paper books, right? So we would be a distribution center for the foundation, and we would have books for sale about, certainly all the Swedenborg's works, and then other current collateral material. Certainly anything about Helen Keller from our tradition, and probably we would have some Helen Keller biographies and other works as well. We hope to get our hands on some good historical materials related to Helen, whether it's Braille copies of the Arcana, or this is a signed letter that was in the library out at the Center for Swedenborgian Studies, written in Braille and then handwritten by Helen. this would be another kind of attraction at the space.
See, when we went to the library on the Harvard campus,
Yep.
I don't know the name of it, but they had a spiral staircase,
Okay.
and the downstairs they had a braille book under glass,
Mhm.
and then they had a metal plaque that you could read with.
Yeah.
So they might be able to help you somehow.
Oh, sure, yeah, and that was actually a traveling display to
Yeah,
several museums to show how we can make things accessible to different people.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then another piece will be collaborating, making this a real meeting place for scholars. Scholars interested in Helen Keller, not just scholars, but seekers. We're all scholars here. Scholars, seekers, interested in Helen Keller, but then also interested in the area of disability spirituality, which is a area of study that has really emerged over the last 20 years. These are some of the more popular books. It really started with The Disabled God by Nancy Iceland. It's a very exciting area of study. It's really bringing, just similar to other liberation theologies that have brought people from the margins into the center. Now we're taking kind of the disabled body and putting that at the center. What do we think of when we think of a full human, and how do we make people, how do we include everyone, and how do we think about our humanity in terms of our vulnerability? We may all, Swedenborg has a lovely vision of us all, 23 in heaven and healthy and frolicking about, but that's not where we spend the most of our time in life. We spend our time being sick. We spend our time being ill, not always at our full capacity. And all of those stages of life is our humanity. So it's very exciting, very interesting, and this will be an opportunity to bring Helen's life into that conversation. A very obvious thing that we want to do, we already are doing, but we want to do better, is supporting students who are looking for ways to connect with their spiritual lives. As having been a student herself in the area, a lot of Helen's writings speak about her time in college. She often says it was pretty stressful and hard. She has a lovely quote: "We should take our education as we would take a walk in the country, leisurely, our minds hospitably open to impressions of every sort." And whereas she was complaining in her time of day, I can only imagine the stress of the students in our time and place. So we hope to be a space that can really create that sense of welcome. Through the Harvard Chaplaincy, we have a wonderful opportunity to make ourselves known in the larger community. As I mentioned, our Taizé services. And then we also are currently working on building a labyrinth on our grounds, which would be another wonderful way for people to connect with their spiritual lives without even having to walk through the door, if that's not something they're quite ready to do yet. This is the current mission and vision for the center, which is still forming, but we're getting closer and closer. So the idea is we will have the chapel, and we will have the spiritual life center, and they'll be, very much connected like the heart and the lungs, but they will be somewhat distinct because we believe that a lot of people will be interested in being involved in the spiritual life center, potentially apart from the chapel or in conjunction. So the center would have its mission very simply be to advance the spiritual legacy of Helen Keller. The vision would be that the Helen Keller Spiritual Life Center is a place for gatherings, programs, and education about Helen Keller, disability spirituality, Swedenborgian theology, and the causes of justice and peace that Helen supported. This vibrant center will be a place where growth is fostered, action is inspired, and beauty is experienced. Together, we will bring about positive changes in individuals and communities, creating a world that is a bit more as Helen believed it could be. And then our values: inclusion, to work continually towards accessibility, uplifting the worthiness of all bodies and supporting human flourishing; examination, to facilitate open dialogue, self-reflection and exploration, grounded in humility, meaning and hope; and celebration, to find pleasure together in the good, the beauty of life, the joy of community, and the abiding presence of the Spirit. Just to share a little bit of the amazing correspondence and synchronicities that have been coming together as this thing has unfolded. This lovely woman here just decided to come to church one day while she was visiting Cambridge. She's the co-founder of the Disability Institute of Emory University. She was very excited about the project and offered to be an advisor. sent me a long list of deafblind artists and writers around the country that can kind of consult with us as we move forward. Just really is an amazing resource. Helen Selson is the archivist for the American Foundation for the Blind. She's offered to come and speak. She's Jewish herself. She's really interested in Helen's spirituality and very conscious. You know, as an archivist, she knows a lot about kind of how Helen's legacy is remembered, and is very aware of how hidden her Swedenborgianism is, and how important it will be to lift that up. Jen Hale's the archivist for Perkins, and again, she's offered herself as an advisor and a support. They have a great collection there. And she in particular is really interested in how we might be a space that explores more of Helen's later life, because there's so much out there about her childhood, from that vision of the miracle worker and her awakening at the water pump. But so much, again, there's still a lot about her life that isn't known. She's a socialist, a feminist, she's an activist in so many ways, and a lot of people don't know that part of her life. She shared with me that during History Week, all the fourth graders call Perkins to find out about Helen Keller, so she said she'll send them all our way once the center is built. And then the last person is pivotal to this. This is Mark Carriega. He joined our church in 2018. He was a student at the Graduate School of Design, walked by the chapel all through school, never came in. And then he was married at the chapel, and then 7 years after that, he and his wife, Allison, decided to come, and they joined the church about 1.5 years ago, and he has been pivotal to this endeavor. If you're gonna get a couple new members, good to get an architect. His wife is a landscape architect, and she designed the labyrinth. So things have moved quickly. So this past year, January to June, is when Mark completed this initial building study, which gave us the designs you saw there. If you'd like to take one, on the back table, there's a template of all of the different levels of the building that you can look at. We were able to do this through funds from the Massachusetts New Church Union, who gave us a grant for about $60,000 so we could complete that work, so that we have a real strong sense of what we want to build and how much it's going to cost us, which is all very important to make something happen. Our goals is that from now until January, this is really a time for me to come out and talk to people like you. This is about development, fundraising, getting the vision out there, sharing what we want to do, establishing ourselves as a separate entity, all the things that are going to happen if this is going to come into being. And then we hope, our prayer is that next year we would have the funds to begin with the design process, which would take about a year. During this time, we'll have to keep the fundraising work going, keep the programming for the center going, and hopefully developing some strong partnerships with other organizations that want to be in this work with us. We're such a small church, and I certainly don't want to just be doing everything that's happening at the center. So we're really hoping to have a lot of official partners who will come in and do things that are a part that support our mission. And then we'll break ground in 2021, in the spring. Why not? Let's do it. And it'll take about 1.5 years for construction. In the fall, we would be having some kind of a celebratory conference supported by the Center for Swedenborgian Studies, and we will start to do this thing. So, this is our plan. Some of you have probably seen this online. What we're calling the group of people that we're seeking to gather around this project to help to bring it into being, we're calling ourselves Helen Circle. And you can join by going to our website. You can find a place on Facebook. There's some little yellow slips of paper at the back of the room where you can add your email. And really this circle is about, really first and foremost, praying. Because I do think this thing has a life of its own. And God is doing a lot of the heavy lifting to get this come into being. The next thing we really want help with is sharing the vision. So anytime I put anything up there on Facebook or social media, if you're able to share it or like it or any of those things, that really is going to help us so that more people can find out about what we're doing. Because one of the blessings of this vision is that Helen Keller is someone who is beloved way beyond the walls of our small church. And then pledging again in the early years. We're hopeful that we'll be able to find finances. There's a lot of money in our church that's sort of molding in the corner that needs to come out and be useful. But we will certainly need some other larger donations, and then we'll need some support as we move along. One of the blessings is because our building is so beautiful, we do hope that once it's built and once we get things off the ground, it'll be able to be pretty self-sufficient because of the amount of money that we're able to bring in from other rentals and other opportunities. So there's a lot of hope that this can be something that will be able to live and thrive for many years. So that's my presentation. Are there any questions?